Hello and welcome. I know we're expecting a few more people, so I'm anticipating we'll have some others joining in. But I also know as leaders, sometimes things just happen. So oh, here comes one of our folks. So I was going to add you in the have you just add in the chat, but I'm going to have you just share with us since it's just such a small group. Daniela, do you want to do a brief introduction? And well, I'll do an introduction myself first, and I'll ask you to do a brief introduction of where you're from, where you're joining us from, and what your role is in your school, and then also what model you're doing. So my name is Margie Dorhorst. I'm a curriculum instructional designer for the Center for Responsive Schools, and I'm joining you from Wisconsin. My role in schools has been previous to my role here with Responsive Classroom. I was an elementary principal for a number of years. Prior to that, I was a speech and language pathologist and a gifted and talented instructor. But the biggest thing with being an elementary principal was we did implement responsive classroom school-wide for all the time that I was there. And I've been a trainer for this work for 15 years. So I'm glad you were all able to join us. We also have two of our consulting teachers, which I'm going to have them introduce themselves as well. But I'm going to have you start, since again, we have a small group. Daniela, would you mind doing a brief introduction of who you are and where you're from, and to make it so we can see each other a little bit better? I'm going to stop share.
Hi, I'm Daniela Wiener, and I'm in Santa Monica, California. I'm an instructional coach at a dual language Spanish-English immersion school. And this is the second year we are implementing responsive classroom. And this is actually my first year on site, but I've had previous training at other sites.
Well, welcome. We're glad you're here. And hope everybody's healthy there. I keep seeing on the news how bad it is in California, and I know it's just so scary right now. So hope everybody's safe.
Thank you.
How are you delivering your model for education at your school right now?
Oh, we are distance learning since the beginning of the school year, and probably will complete the school year that way, with some like small modifications where we're going to probably be adding enrichment activities in the afternoon in cohorts, kind of like a hybrid model, if the numbers go down, which they don't look like they're going down.
Yeah, unfortunately. Let's just get those vaccines. All right, thank you. Patricia, introduce yourself, please. Oops, just unmute if you can remember.
Sorry about that. Thought I was getting good at this. I'm Patricia Holt. I teach fourth grade at Holy Cross School in Garrett Park, Maryland. We're just outside of Washington, D.C. It's, small school, pre-K 3 through 8, one class per grade. We attempted responsive classroom probably like 5 or 6 years ago, school-wide, and it worked quite well. And then I think that our principal wants to sort of bring it back on board. I actually still use some of the, techniques myself, and I always have since we learned it. For example, I use the chime to get everyone to quiet rather than, all the other ways that teachers try to get students to quiet down. We also use that in our lunchroom when we could have lunch in the cafeteria. So we would have 3 classes in there and just ring that chime, and then everyone quiets down right away because they know, things like that. So we're hybrid. We have, for example, I have 25 students in my 4th grade class. 11 are in front of me, and then 14 are virtual. Every Friday is virtual for everyone. Last week was our first week coming back from Christmas break, and so everyone was virtual just to make sure that those who might have traveled were indeed quarantining, sort of a fourth quarantine. And then I have other parents in my class who, by their own admission, said, we still need to keep our child home. So yeah, we have a really good parent population for adhering to the rules. And so far, knock on wood, we haven't had to shut down.
It sounds like the model that you're sharing, Patricia, too, is one of the hardest ones when you have a little bit of both. So I give you credit, such a challenge that it is. And before I have Ramona and Lindsay introduce themselves, so the purpose of this workshop webinar today is designed for leaders who are in charge of supporting professional development beyond the week-long training, leaders that are under contract with their school. So you both have different roles in your school that aren't the principal or aren't the administrator. Are you both in charge of some of the leadership for professional development in your school as well?
No, I'm not.
So Daniela, yes, and then Patricia, no. So this will be recorded and would be important to share with your principal then, Patricia, or whoever is in charge of professional development. Just one more question. It's also for people that are under contract where they've done like a 4-day training with responsive classroom, probably over the summer or previously. Is that something your
Oh,
school just did,
I
Patricia?
understand.
Did your school just do that, Patricia, that you're
No,
aware of?
they did it several years ago, and the 2 teachers who actually did that training have since left, which is why I'm guessing that obviously if they were still with the school, they would be here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm gonna share with you today may or may not be as relevant for you because I'll be talking basically to that audience that would have participated in that training.
Sure.
And you know, you're welcome to stay on with us so that you're aware of that. And then also, I know our school services team is the ones that connected you with us. So I'm sure there's a reason that you're here today. But just know that if you're feeling like, well, how does this apply to me? It might just be that it's just how it's been connected is a little bit different.
Sure.
So I want to welcome our 2 educational consultants who are full-time consulting teachers for the Center for Responsive Schools. They're people I learned from and I work with, and they're going to be, especially for you, Daniela, in the role that you have, they're going to be in the role that is going to be really important for you and your school as you move forward with the work to implement responsive classroom school-wide. So Ramona, would you start with an introduction, please? You just have to make Patricia feel better.
I just came from presenting all day where I wasn't muted. And so I'm in kind of an overload of, and so as Margie said, I work full-time for the Center for Responsive Schools. And part of our job is to not only provide the training, but then building capacity in schools. And so as a support staff, how can we best meet the needs of the schools? So we're here to learn with you of not only what needs might be there in the schools, but how this tool might be able to support you as you move forward.
So Ramona's had a lot of opportunity working with schools this year in that virtual model and supporting them and providing some professional development support across the board for that. And she's in your neck of the wood, Patricia. I think, are you in Virginia, Ramona? Is that where you're at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
She's over on the east side.
I'm on the other side of the bridge, Patricia. So probably the same distance, but we call it the Potomac is like the bridge of Virginia, Maryland. Yeah.
Well, my thought goes out to both of you and the crisis that's been so vivid and disturbing. I can't even imagine. And then let's welcome Lindsay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Lynch. I also work for the Center for Responsive Schools and supporting schools like yours, districts, leaders. I'm coming to you from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And before I did this work full time, I had an opportunity to help found and lead what's become a network of successful charter schools focused on closing the opportunity gap in the Twin Cities. So those will be some of the lenses that I am learning with, along with you today.
And
Did
Lindsay,
I get it all, Margie?
You got it. And Lindsay trains around the country and internationally as well, as both her and Ramona do that. And currently now doing all that virtually. Her main contact with leaders is going to be in the Midwest, but she again would be available to any of you along the way. This is a 90-minute time frame set up for this, but having just completed this in the morning, it's going to go a little quicker because we're in a smaller group. And I think it's just going to lend itself to those great discussions being a little bit easier this way. So glad you're all here. So this is the webinar, Tools for Supporting Ongoing Growth and Professional Development with Responsive Classroom. The leaders that have chosen to bring responsive classroom to their schools are looking for that combination of social, emotional, and academic learning at the same time. And often it's brought in as a school-wide approach, but kind of like Patricia shared, sometimes a couple of teachers get the training and they inspire others. In fact, that's often how it starts. Sounds like, Daniela, how it started for you was a school-wide approach. And when that happens, a lot of times teachers are trained, I should say all educators, teachers as well as all educators and support staff in the school are trained in different ways. This workshop is designed for those that have just completed a 4-day responsive classroom core course. And the purpose of this is to introduce the leaders to the tools that are designed by our organization to support leaders, to support teachers with implementing the approach, as well as professional development from here on, on. And I guess it's in the moment professional development. A lot of times we can look at a catalog and say, well, this is what I think we should bring to our school, or this is the conference we should go to. The purpose of this is to show you a little bit more directed and in the moment decisions for professional development. I'm going to share with you content to begin with, and this is a little bit more of a direct presentation. Then we'll take some time for answering questions and also to share some of the responses that you're using and some ideas of how this could be used with your school. So that's exciting. You don't have a handout for this right now, but after this meeting, you will have a follow-up email that has the resources from today, which include a copy of this recording. So even though, Patricia, you're not the person in charge of the school, you'll be able to take the recording back to your leader. And Danielle, the same thing if you're part of a leadership team. So taking a look just briefly at the Zoom tools, we're probably very familiar with all of this, but the mute and the unmute, I think we all know how to do that. And I'll keep you muted in the group, but feel free at any time to unmute to just ask a question. Especially those ones that help me in the just now type of thing. You can add questions to the chat, but just know sometimes it's a little harder for me to direct my attention to a chat. If you need to step away, feel free to stop video if you need to. Otherwise, it helps me because I see all of you when I'm presenting, so it feels like I've got a group. And in addition, that chat feature we'll use just for helping us do some goal setting at times. I'll probably use it a little less today since we're that small group. We can just share. It's kind of like we're in a breakout room of our own. And the reaction, sometimes those are a good way. I think you did that before. Daniela just gave me a thumbs up that to affirm that there was something that you participated with. Another structure that's helpful when I'm presenting is the rename feature. The rename is the ability to change the name that shows up underneath your picture. And how that helps us as presenters is we can just remember your first name, how you want to be called, but also the level and the position that you're at. So if you can click on the 3 white dots if you hover over your picture, in the upper right-hand corner, there's 3 blue dots that are, or white dots and a blue square. If you click on that, you'll hit rename is about the 4th bullet down. And when you see rename, if you can type in and put your first name and how you'd want to be called. So Patricia, if you prefer to continue to be called Patricia, if there's a nickname that you'd prefer. And then the level and position that you have. So when I was a principal, I would have put Margie, elementary principal. You could do that rename right now. And I'm going to do that on my own name as a model. Along the way, as you have questions, again, just feel free in the small group that we have here to just unmute and ask those questions. I may respond to the question right then, or I may ask Ramona or Lindsay, because I'm really presenting for a group of us, and Ramona and Lindsay are part of that group. So they may be the better people to respond to those questions. If I feel like the question is going to be answered down the road for the time that we are together, I might just say, hold that thought, jot it down so you don't forget. And then I'll say, we'll come to that a little bit later. I'll stay on at the end if you have any additional burning questions or particular questions for the work that you're doing as well. I'm going to go over the learning goals just briefly, and I want you to think about what's your purpose of joining in today. So first of all, in this 90-minute webinar workshop, our goal is to really talk about those strategies that will support your school in continuing with the growth and responsive classroom, both in systemic growth, meaning a whole school system growth, and also that individual growth through observation and goal setting cycles. We know that process is important. As an administrator, I know that's important. It's important to do with students as well. We're going to talk about how you can do that with this approach and differentiate it from an evaluation approach, which sometimes is what we jump to when we talk about observing and setting goals. I'm also going to show you the tools. I'll show you the kaleidoscope and briefly show you the responsive classroom assessment tool that we'll explore today, and just give you a little bit of opportunity to see when these tools come to you, how they can be used to support you in your school. We're going to talk about both that systemic growth process, but then also for individual goal setting. So for example, I think, Patty, that was something you kind of referred to as saying, we've all had training at different points, or some people have had more training. Maybe there's individual goal setting that each person wants to have to further their development with responsive classroom. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that with the tool we have called the Responsive Classroom Assessment Tool, or it's nicknamed the Rcat. And then you'll also get a chance in conversations to talk with Ramona and Lindsay, who will be the educational consultants, along with 2 other educational consultants I'll talk to you about in a little bit, to know what their role is going to be in supporting you. So take a look at those goals and just jot down a goal or a focus that you hope to meet during this webinar time. Just keep that somewhere so you can look at it at the end to see if you've met your goal. This is the agenda. So it's kind of 5 points. Some of them will take a little bit longer than others, but we're going to talk about and differentiate systemic and individual professional growth, differentiate it from evaluation. We're going to talk about the 2 tools, the kaleidoscope for systemic growth and self-determined individual growth based on the Rcat that I talked about. We'll talk about the opportunities for further professional development, some that are free and available on our website, and then some that could be contracted or individually attained along the way. And then we'll close with thinking about what the next steps are going to be. So take a moment right now, and I know we're in different roles rather than being necessarily the principal in the school, but think about what your goal is for implementing responsive classroom in your school. Daniela, if you're the instructional coach, as well as being the guidance counselor, it might be the school-wide goal, or it could be an individual goal that you have. And Patty, probably more of an individual goal that you have for your school. And with that goal, add it into the chat. So we've got that to refer to, and just an easy way to see, gives you time to think about it rather than putting you on the spot. Add it into the chat. I'm excited to see the people that are committed to trying to make responsive classroom work in their schools. It's an exciting and challenging approach sometimes for people, even when we have normal conditions. But through this approach, I think right now it's been even more of a challenge with the pandemic and the health restrictions that have been made, whether you're all virtual, like you're talking about in California, or that mix that you're doing, Patty, in DC. When we're doing the work in responsive classroom, a lot of times the training is something that as a leader you may be part of, or you may not be as connected with the part of it, but the leadership role is so important to this approach, working and making a difference for students in your school. It's a big investment to bring responsive classroom to your schools, or even to send individual teachers to a training. So when we do that, the idea is to not just train people, but to see change. So this model is something that we share often with folks, but our goal is to have that safe, joyful, inclusive classroom, the part on the right, that's focused on engaging academics, effective management, positive community, and developmentally responsive teaching all at the same time. And then imagine trying to do that in a classroom that we want to see change throughout a school. And it sounds like you're both kind of in that place where it's a change you're hoping to not just see in individual classrooms, but across the school and all the settings there. And now then just add the additional, challenge of a pandemic that we're dealing with. Even the role that we're playing with you right now is typically different in a non-pandemic year, but we're trying to meet the needs of everybody. So doing a virtual presentation is kind of the way a lot of things are happening. To get to that place though, it's based on 4 decades worth of study and approach on core beliefs and guiding principles. Those same core beliefs and guiding principles have led us to responsive classroom teaching practices. And you're all at the elementary school, I believe. So all of those teaching practices that have been in place in the elementary school have been in place for those 4 decades. In the last decade, we've expanded and included the middle school model. So we get that K-8 perspective. But those practices we found as we've supported educators and we work with colleagues that work in schools during these last crazy 9 months, 10 months, have been something that have been really important for teachers to lean on. So we are committed to supporting you and your schools to continue to use these practices and support the growth of those practices this year. We also realize that the goal is, the hope is, the dream is that next year will look a little bit more normal, I guess. So the work that I'm going to share with you today is an introduction for this school year in 2021, but also know that it's something you can use next year and will continue to support you next year as well. So it's not like something you have to just get done in the next 4 months and totally stress everybody out. The work that we do is based on an approach that we call the phases of growth. As a learner, you know that students are, or as an educator, I'm sorry, you know that students are at all different phases, and that we teach and differentiate for students and create a classroom environment and a school environment for all students. We realize that when we train for responsive classroom, that we somewhat have an expectation that people are at the lower phase of growth when they come into our 4-day training. Although we're very aware that some people come in already having had training or done some learning on their own. But that training is focused on the practices, the knowledge, the skills, and the dispositions that are focused on responsive classroom. As we move through those phases of growth, we gain confidence, we gain skill ability, we use those practices in a way that makes changes in not just what we do during a morning meeting or do during an interactive learning structure, but we see the impact in the skills we do throughout the day and actually in many different areas. Sometimes when people see this phases of growth, they get a little intimidated and maybe compared a little bit too much to an evaluation system. If we were doing a rubric with a student, we'd say, well, we want them at the 3 or 4 level on a rubric. With this one, I want you to think of it as a growth phase. So anywhere you are on the growth phase is where you are, where your school is. The goal is just to move to that next phase. It's highly expected that after this first 4-day training, that people are still at that emergent stage of their level of growth. And with practice and coaching, they'll get to the mid and stable phase. And acknowledge that that's part of that growth. You can't expect people after a 4-day training to all of a sudden have all the skills. In fact, we know that as presenters, that we'll say, pick one area to grow on because you can't do it all. So we'll also see that there's different phases of growth between and within a person too, which is interesting. As a principal, and I know Lindsay, you can attest to this too in the role that you have, is much of our training and doing observation is for an evaluative purpose. And that evaluation tool I was using at the end of my career looked somewhat like the tool you're going to see today. It was an online rubric that I used for gathering information to give teachers some feedback on different areas. It was a Charlotte Danielson model. We're going to be using a rubric to gather information, but not for the purpose of evaluation, not for the purpose of saying good or bad. We're doing it to get a systemic picture, like a pulse of the school of where it is with the practices being in place. We're not just measuring the practices, but we're measuring the application of the practices and how they impact those domains in different times throughout the next 2 school years, throughout this school year and the next school year. And that's again how you get growth. So if you see a lower scale score on one of these tools, is not an indication of, oh, they didn't learn anything in the training or they're not really taking this seriously. It's just showing they're at the beginning of that phase of growth. To move from phase to phase takes support, professional development, and oftentimes that coaching, which it sounds like Daniela, is kind of your role that you have. 2 tools that your school is going to have access to. The web-based Kaleidoscope is designed for a leader or a coach to use for brief observations in classrooms and then also in non-classroom spaces. It's intended to be a quick, almost like a walkthrough observation tool to take a pulse in a distinct moment, in a short amount of time. Both Ramona and Lindsay and I and our team have done many Kaleidoscope tools where we could come into school in person and we would do those observations all in one school day. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Kaleidoscope in a minute, but I just want to differentiate it from the other tool, which is the responsive classroom assessment tool. So you're going to see that we have an online tool, and then we have a text that's going to be sent to your school that is available for educators to use as a self-determined growth. It's full of rubrics more on the practices of responsive classroom. I was showing you the middle school version, but the new elementary version is the same color as well. I have an older one that's red. But it'll take a practice like teacher language or morning meeting or the rules process. And it'll let me gather a little bit of information about that practice and then use a rubric to set some goals. I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but wanted to just give you a brief introduction. And just a reminder to share with your leaders as well, that these are intended to be growth measures, not evaluation. Okay, I'm gonna stop right there for just a moment. Patty or Daniela, questions that you have before we move into getting into the tools a little bit more?
I guess if there's any guidance on about cycles and how many people to move through at a time, or how often you would use the tool.
Perfect. That question, hold on to that question because it's coming. The answer to that is coming. Good.
I do not have any questions.
All right, thank you. I kind of like the small group here. So the Kaleidoscope, and this is what I'll help with your question, Daniela. And I'm going to show you the tool in just a minute too. So it's web-based, is designed by consulting teachers that work with us, and is designed on an inventory of teacher practices. For each of those domains, there's 4 or 5 indicators that are measured in order to take a snapshot and take a pulse of the implementation of responsive classroom at that time. In addition, we know that about half the time kids are in school, when they are in school, they're in what we call non-classroom spaces, the cafeteria, they're out for recess, they're walking in or in the bus, the hallways, bathrooms, those things. So we have rubrics to observe those as well. And I'll talk a little bit about what to do when you don't have students in session with you too, because you'll need to make some changes with that. They're designed to make quick decisions. We call it a high inference tool. When you're in the classroom, there's 18 things that you're checking a phase of development on, and you're doing it with a rubric online, and you're doing it rather quickly. It takes about 15 to 20 minutes for that observation, and the recommended number of observations is 10. When you're observing in those 10 classrooms, you're trying to get a spectrum of school. Now I know, Patty, you said your school is kind of small, that you have 1 class per grade. So that's pretty typical when we'll visit schools. We'll probably try to get to every class sometime during the day to observe in there. And then I try to get to music, art, PE, if there's a language class, if there's a self-contained or more resource room, special education class, so that I have that amount of information. When I'm gathering that information, I'm not doing it to evaluate that classroom, but I'm looking for where our school is falling on the rubric. I might have a feeling in my head where I think we are, but the purpose of this tool is to give you a data-informed piece of information, a data-informed profile, so that it can direct you to what you can do for professional development. And I'll show you that because it'll link to some options for that as well. I think the challenge all of us have is that there's 18 things that you're measuring, and some of them you're not seeing in front of you during that 15 to 20 minutes when you're in the classroom. So you infer, well, because of what I'm seeing, I'm inferring that this is most likely happening when I'm not there. And you're not particularly observing the practices. So I may not be observing a morning meeting, but I can infer when I'm in other times during the day that I want to see that positive community that's established during a morning meeting and how it impacts the rest of the day. It's a tool that you have the opportunity to use a total of 3 times. A typical package for us, that 3 times would have occurred within 1 school year, but because of the pandemic, we're spreading this opportunity for you out over a 2-year period. So the first observation, we're recommending and asking that you complete before March 1st. And then I would hold off the next 2 observations for the next school year. I would recommend getting them on the calendar though, so that you can do that. Let me share just a little bit more information on the next slide. So when you're using this tool, you'll get an email that's sent to you by our office staff that in our school services team. I'll show you the tool in a minute, but the instructions on how to use the tool are embedded in the tool. So there's a support tab that you open up and you watch the videos. There also are some sample classrooms that you can observe and some examples of what a profile looks like. When you select those 10 classrooms, I would typically do that when I was observing as an outside observer in 1 day. So I'd start in the morning and try to kind of shuffle myself through the school, not in any particular order, but I might be in kindergarten for a literacy lesson. I might be in 3rd grade for a math lesson. I might go to the PE classroom. And again, I'm just moving to each of the classrooms rather quickly, taking my laptop and doing that scoring. If I'm in a middle school, it would be similar, but I'd be going grade levels and content sharing. And some of the teachers I would observe would have been trained in responsive classroom, some of them not. And it's interesting because these are indicators of the practices, how they impact effective management, positive community, developmentally responsive teaching, and engaging academics. But even sometimes people that haven't come in or haven't participated in a 4-day training, I'll see indicators of those approaches as well when I'm in their classes. Yes, Daniela.
What modifications do you recommend for distance learning? Just because it's like doing the same numbers just doesn't work. We don't have the same non-classroom spaces. We are currently doing 180 minutes of academic or 180, 210 instructional minutes per day. So
Okay.
this couldn't happen trying to jump between Zoom room and Zoom room, the 200 minutes you would need here. So what are you guys thinking in terms of modifications?
Schools that have talked to us about making these modifications now, again, check the pulse of your teachers and see what would work for them. But my guess is there's shorter observations because you're not observing some of the classroom things that you can see because they're all at home. They're not in their classrooms. And in addition to that is if you need to spread it out over a number of days, do that as well. I would recommend having the observations be in that 15 to 20 minute range. But again, I think you could join them in that amount of time. Ramona and Lindsay, tell me your thoughts on it.
Those are going to be the 2 things that I suggested. I think at first I was thinking the observations would be shorter, but then I was thinking due to the nature of Zoom, you might need 15, 20 minutes to see a teacher being developmentally responsive, to see them stop and do an energizer or some sort of community building or get kids into breakout rooms or, I wonder if, anyway, that's what I was thinking. And over a couple of days, I also think would be, could be a great idea and giving even the observer brain a little bit of a a rest and opportunities to see different people on different days.
Is that kind of what you're thinking, Ramona, also?
Yeah, I was visualizing as you were talking of being in the role of Daniela and Patty, if they were, the people doing it. And, there's also non-observed too. So you can also, isn't it non-observed that?
Not evident or not observed, either one. Yeah.
Because, for example, if you're to look at positively response to misbehavior and you don't see any misbehavior, it's not like, oh, I've got to wait 2 hours until the child misbehaves. So, I think too, even maybe even going back, I don't know that you can go back to, but again, I think it's to give you a snapshot of what is embedded in the culture versus this teacher isn't doing X, Y, and Z. And so I think that just, am I seeing the teacher language over across classrooms? Am I seeing that teachers are making decisions proactively versus reactively? I think that really, you can walk away with a lot of information, even if it's virtual.
To be honest, neither of us, or the three of us, we haven't had the opportunity to use this tool virtually. So you're going to teach us on how this is going to go as well. We've done a lot of teaching virtually, but to do observing virtually is going to be a challenge. I do think it's kind of exciting to think that it's a tool that can be used that way though as well. It will still inform you where this process is in this kind of unique time. The non-classroom spaces, we've talked about that a little bit as well. The non-classroom spaces, in Patty's case, you're able to walk through the school and use the tool and observe what's happening in the school. For a complete virtual setting, you've got a couple of different options. One is to just use the tool and input what you can remember from in-session times. Sometimes people have said, well, I could just walk through the school now and that might, just help me refresh my mind and think of what it would have been like. You can also run this tool without doing the non-classroom spaces, which, to be honest, as a leader, I may do. The only reason I would want to do it would be so I have a little bit more idea what to expect when I would run that tool next year, but you can do it separately. And hopefully that helps. It's going to create for you a growth profile, which when I've done these with schools, that's such an exciting time for the schools because they're like, what is it going to look like? What did she see when she comes in? And I always like the growth profile to me kind of comes like when you get the school picture packet and like, does this look like your school? Does it look kind of what you're expecting? Or sometimes people say, well, that looks better than what we thought we were at. Or, oh, I guess you didn't see the same things we thought we were at. So it's a good way to have kind of this researched tool to help you compare to yourself to see if this looks like your school or if there's some area that maybe doesn't look like your school, but it's also intended to be that indicator of growth. What can we do next to continue growing in responsive classroom and literally continue growing and creating social, emotional, and academic learning for all students to be successful? Just a few things about what the indicators tell us, and then I'm going to show you a picture of what that looks like. You're going to get a couple of different indicators for each of the domains. So the 4 domains, it's going to score out based on those 10 classrooms and the indicators that you observed. You're going to get a domain score. So as you look at those 4 domains, you might see that, oh wow, we're emergent in engaging academics, but we're more on the mid for effective management. I've never observed anybody that was stable on anything the first time I observed them. So I was thinking, there's room for growth. So you'll see those scores on those areas. Then what you'll do is within that domain, there's 4 or 5 indicators that will individually score as well. So you can say, we scored at a mid for effective management. where were some areas of strength for that, and where were some areas that we could grow even more. And no matter where you fall on the growth indicators, we connect you with some areas for professional development that you continue to grow on. You're also going to see some patterns. One of the things that was kind of interesting, I worked with a school that had some of their elementaries were focused on literacy development and some of their elementaries were focusing on math development. They both were, or all the schools, all of these elementaries were all focused on responsive classroom. When I used this tool though, when I went into their schools, I would see a pattern that the schools that were doing the literacy development and using a workshop model were really high on positive community and engaging academics, but might be a little lower in some of the other areas. And the effective management was high in the schools that I observed that were doing math. So we had some good discussion about that. Well, maybe we focus more on routines and procedures for math, where we focus more on building that community of readers and writers when we're focusing on literacy. The goal for that then is to find some targeted areas for professional development. Again, you don't just need to target the areas that are in the earlier phases of development. You might target for the mid or the stable areas as you're moving along. And the purpose of this is to sustain that growth in responsive classroom practices over time. And I'm going to say over time in various locales around the school, and to maintain a core of practices that will support new staff as they come in, student teachers, substitute and guest teachers as they come in, so that you're aware of what those practices look like in your school and how we can continue to grow them along the way. So what does Kaleidoscope look like? This is an example of a school growth profile, but what I'm going to show you is the actual tool. It's going to be just a little easier to do that by pulling up the tool that I have online. You'll get a link to this website. It's called the Kaleidoscope. Again, it's created by our Center for Responsive Schools. This simple menu of Get Started, the Kaleidoscope process, and sample results. When you click on this, you can immediately click on the Kaleidoscope process. It's just briefly informative. You could look at sample results, but you're going to get a login to get started. When you click on Get Started, you'll add in your login, and then your dashboard will come up. Your dashboard will say the name of your school. You'll have then 2 inventories that you can use for when you do your observations. But before you do your observations, I want you to look at this top menu over here where it says support. When I click on support, it's going to link me to the videos that I talked about. And again, they're brief, they're informative, they walk you right through the tool and how to use this tool. And, you know, if it's you're the person that's doing this, or if there's somebody else that's doing the observations, anybody can watch this video that has the link. And there's also some sample videos and a training manual. So you can practice doing it before you actually enter into the school. And then back on this, after I enter in my and it's usually 6 to 10 classrooms. And I believe it's almost all of the non-classroom spaces. This check will come up and I can click on this blue bar. When I click on the blue bar, it'll pull up my school growth profile, which I can convert to a PDF so I could share it with others. But for each of those domains, so you'll see the effective management has 4 indicators. I'll get a score, an average domain score, and then it'll tell me what level in that phases of growth I'm in. This one was emergent. Again, it's early in implementation, so it's pretty expected to be at that level. And the description underneath tells you a little bit more about what indicated that, what showed that. This one, I was just doing a trial one, so I just put them all in at the emergent level, but you're going to see differentiation. Higher, lower, and again, you might have some that are not evident, so those wouldn't be scored in there. What I find really exciting though about this tool is that I can then click on the recommended resources, and depending upon how I scored or how the school scored on that, I can look for books, workshops, quick coaching guides, or articles that will continue our professional development. And there's a lot here. So what you would do is you say, you know what, looks like an area we really want to grow on is engaging academics. Let's take a look at the books. Looks like we have a few of these in our staff library that we could use. And perhaps we'll do a book study to do a little bit more about that. Or as I described to you, there's quick coaching guides. I'll describe those in a little bit more, but maybe as a school, we say, we're going to really work on the power of observation. Right now, it's been really difficult when we're virtual, but we want to focus on building that skill, or maybe it's the high expectations for all students. Part of your package that you have this year is your school gets a free pack of 30 of one quick coaching guide. And I'll show you what a quick coaching guide looks like. So it's a bifold, which is designed in that coaching strategy of a little bit of information, reflect on the current approach, a few ideas to try out, some goal setting and reflection. So it's that natural learning cycle of learning. For any of the articles that are listed here, let's say, Daniela, if you're in charge of working with the group and you all want to work on, let's say, middle school motivators article that you want to do that. Whoops, for some reason that one didn't link. But if I go to any of the articles, they'll link to a PDF of the article. The advantage of linking it to a PDF, it's easy to share with the team. So if you're going to work on that. So I want you to think about what I just shared with you about Kaleidoscope, because that pretty much was the nutshell. How could you see Kaleidoscope being used in your schools?
You mentioned Charlotte Danielson.
Mm-hmm.
Do these work together, both of these models? Okay.
They're not intentionally designed to be together. And Charlotte Danielson's evaluation tool is for teacher evaluation.
Right.
But when you look at the 4 domains of responsive classroom and you look at the 4 categories that Charlotte Danielson looks at, they're very aligned in a lot of ways, which I think teachers find reassuring.
Yeah, because we do use Charlotte Danielson for
Mhm.
teacher observation. And the teacher that was in charge of that is the same teacher that also received this training. And as I said, she's gone.
Yeah.
Second year, not at our school. So it just, I can see how they're kind of closely aligned. So everything that you said sounds very familiar. We were, after the 2 teachers received the 4-day training, they did come back and do like a professional development for all the other teachers. Morning meeting. I know that our younger grades have morning meeting. I used to have them before, obviously, the pandemic. And then last year I had to stop having the morning meetings only because we were doing a 3rd, 4th, 5th switch, and my schedule did not allow for it. I tried to even squeeze it in at some other time in the day. It just did not work. But I do know our pre-K through 2nd grade still adhere to the morning meetings.
It's interesting, those that have done kind of that switch, or they might call it departmentalized at the elementary level, so that one person teaches all one strategy. They might divide that morning meeting up throughout the day. Like maybe the first teacher starts with, well, I'll do the greeting and the sharing, and then somebody else will do the activity during the day. And someone else will do a closing. So taking the same components and the learning to build that community, but you almost have to build a community in every classroom that they go in, because class becomes a community, but the teacher doesn't get to know the students as well if they don't have them for the morning meeting.
Right. And I also know that a lot of the younger grade teachers do use the energizers.
Perfect.
Yeah.
How about you, Daniela? I think you're in that unique approach where you're doing it all virtual and probably for the rest of the school year, like you said. What are your thoughts of using this tool?
I'm thinking about just like the space in our PD calendar and coaching, and trying to think about what data would be the most useful and where we could actually leverage it and actually impact student engagement. Because I think that's been the hardest piece virtually, is keeping kids engaged. So I'm thinking I could probably use the Kaleidoscope, create a baseline, but not do much more with it in terms of whole school PD during this year, because we already have other competing site goals. And I think it's been such an overwhelming year for our staff. I don't want to add to it, and I want them to continue to be excited about this approach. So I think maybe what I'll do is look for opportunities for celebration, and then growing on some strengths. And then maybe with some of my more new teachers that I'm coaching one-on-one through cycles, maybe tucking in some stuff with them, and maybe looking for a couple of early adopters to then move it into next year. But like a whole school piece is not going to be there. And I definitely do not want them to feel like they're being evaluated in a virtual environment where so much of this work is pretty much impossible. So I just want to be really mindful of it.
You have such a good pulse, both of you, on the feeling for your staff right now. And again, that's what we're really telling people to do, what's going to work for your school. I can only speak for myself, and I can let Ramona and Lindsay kind of pop in too, but I have found that doing these cycles of observation, when we did them, and of course we're coming in as an outside, somewhat expert, ended up being more affirming. And right now, I know a lot of teachers are lacking efficacy and, getting frustrated with the fact that they can't do some of the things that they normally have done different times of the year. They can't measure the success like they did. So it'd be an interesting experiment in a way for us to see how can this tool work to support teachers in this struggle. Lindsay,
It's hard because so much of this stuff is about in like whole school environment, and we're missing a lot of our school. Like we don't have these other outside classroom spaces. We don't have opportunities to build community outside of breakout rooms and whole class. Like all of our enrichment and PE is asynchronous, and kids are only engaged kind of live for academics, and that also targets like very specific learning styles, and certain kids thrive in those areas. So I think we're operating at like, that's what I was asking about modifications more. I feel like, we're in January now, and essentially with all the pieces that we're being asked to do, very little has been modified, including our state assessments and so forth. So I would just kind of ask you guys to consider going forward, like what are ways that you can ask people that are kind of newer at this work, what ways could this be modified? Because you can't really do it all right now. And we're being asked to do everything, just do it over more days, but we actually have less minutes. And everything, like as Lindsay says, takes a lot longer, just even for me to bounce from classroom to classroom. I have a pod in my backyard with 7 kids, so my internet's constantly going out, and children are going in and out, and we're a Title I school, so we have a lot of kids who don't have the resources to improve their internet connectivity. So just like, what are ways that we can kind of make the ask smaller at this point in the year?
I don't know, Daniela, if any of your staff signed up or had access to, we had put out earlier in the year 10 days of morning meetings for each grade level. Did you get access to that?
There's so many initiatives that the teachers are being asked to do, and they don't even care if they're going to be paid for it. They are done. They're so exhausted. They are not signing up for anything that is, unless it's mandated. So, I mean, I've invited everybody, but they're cooked because they're at home and they have their kids at home too. And it's just,
It's a free resource. It's not a workshop that they'd have to attend. So it's like an online PDF. But what we were trying to do, our organization was trying to do, again, with the support of teachers that we know are in the same boat that you are, that work with us, saying, what do teachers need the most now? And what we heard them say is they don't need to think. They need something given to them so they can just say, I want to do a morning meeting. How can I do it if I'm virtual? How can I do it if I'm socially distanced? So that's what it looks like. But I can try to include, or maybe Lindsay or Ramona can include that link for that for you if you haven't received it. And for you, Patty, it'd be good to share with your folks, because
one other thing that I think could be really useful is right now with, our district is implementing social justice standards and all the things that are going on in our world. That's a nice little tucked in time that everybody has committed to morning meeting. I think people would really welcome content that was connected to, to some of the socially relevant pieces that teachers need to tackle right now with their kids.
And that is something, even before all the craziness that has happened, has been a priority of the work that we're doing. And we're continuing to learn and to build in some of those topics. We're excited right now because I think one of the most exciting new things that's been in place is Responsive Classroom has a part of our Responsive Classroom Center for Responsive Schools has created a social emotional curriculum called Fly 5. And it's just being rolled out this spring, but that builds in actual lessons, practices, and skills for those 5 care skills of cooperation, assertiveness, responsibility, empathy, and self-control. And they're grade level kits from kindergarten through 8th grade. So I know Lindsay and Ramona spent a little bit more time on learning about Fly 5, but as you're moving in, you know, and sad to say, Title I schools sometimes have resources that other schools don't. And I don't know about Holy Cross too, but we're finding some leaders are saying, what do you have that can help us? Because we know once those kids come back in place, there's going to be gaps to fill. And those gaps aren't just in academics. And if they are in academics, we know how to fill gaps in academics. What we don't know are how to fill these ability to be assertive when you feel like you've been wronged, or how to show empathy when you see somebody who's maybe having a struggle. So we now have those lessons that are directly out there. And Lindsay or Ramona, anything else you want to share with either of those topics?
I did add that first 10 days of morning meeting PDF to the chat, and this would be great to use at any time of the year. And Danielle, I was thinking about your question about not wanting to overwhelm people and really giving a supportive tool. I guess I'm thinking back to my time as an instructional coach, how I could use that tool. I might look through the goals of those days and a teacher might come to mind. Like I noticed the first one was like, one of the goals is turning the attention toward the teacher. So if I'm in doing an observation in Zoom and I see 24 of the 25 kids either have their cameras off, are playing with something else, are clearly watching television, or are just not otherwise engaged, maybe that's one that I would introduce to that teacher as something that could be helpful. And it would also be a way of like infusing some of this social and emotional learning and community into this otherwise, you know, plastic world that we're all living in. So I think kind of feeling that with like a practical tool and also not something new. It's like, oh, this is a struggle in Lindsay's online community right now. This seems like a good fit. I'm going to chat with her about some of these ideas. So that's something that came to mind.
And even as a coach, being willing to team with somebody to try it out. When we gave these out for free in the fall, a lot of people were excited about it. And they said, but what do we do after 10 days? But what they realized is you look at different grade levels and you can use these, again, you can pull things from I could pull things from the 3rd grade level to use in 4th grade. And once people could look at the Responsive Classroom morning meeting through the lens of either socially distanced or virtual, then they could look at other things more easily that way too. So if it helps, great. If not, don't even feel like you need to pass it on, but it just made me think of you and what your school might need. Well, I'm going to share one more tool with you. And that's what we call the Rcat. So the Rcat tool is that individual rubrics for educators to use. So it's a responsive classroom assessment tool. This was created by our consulting teachers for consulting teachers, and also for, I shouldn't say for consulting teachers, for educators to use. When I was a principal, our teachers loved this tool. I had a couple of them in the building, and it was helpful for somebody said, we really need to strengthen our morning meeting. Let's take a look at the rubrics for morning meeting. And let's start with the message. It feels like the messages when I go from room to room seem inconsistent. One of the teachers said, who was a support staff. I think she was a speech and language pathologist. She's seen, is there supposed to be a format for the message? Because I don't remember when we had training. So just a small team then use the rubrics for message to help them set some goals for what they want to do to improve the message part of morning meeting. Another group was really struggling with transitions. And what they found in there was that there was a rubric for transitions that could be used. So the first grade team said, let's try that, the strategies for transitions. They looked through the rubric, they set some goals, they put it in place and went back to the rubric to help them. What again, this differentiates though, an evaluative tool versus a self-assessment tool. Is designed for teachers to use to help them grow. So I kind of say it's self-directed, but it might be self-directed as a team, especially I think of Daniela, your role as a coach, that sometimes what we think is one thing, having to have a rubric or a piece of paper to help them see where they are in the growth helps. And knowing those phases of growth, just recognizing where we are on those phases helps us to look what to do for the next time. Part of that reflective learning cycle is also to take time to reflect, and there's a reflective piece of that too. I know those coaching conversations are often getting our educators that we work with to reflect what did they notice, and having those reflective questions can either guide those conversations that you have, or they can also be used by the teacher before they would meet with you as a coach. How leaders use these. So if you're sharing these with your principal or your leaders, saying they also refer to resources that are available to support each of those areas, how leaders can kind of help fill that gap. If it's an area for morning meeting, do we have the books that might be helpful for the 80 morning meeting activities, if that would help? Or looks like everybody could really benefit from a chime. Patty might say, I use the chime and I don't see everybody using it. Could your principal help maybe make that happen? Or maybe we're going to go online and try to watch some videos about morning meetings so that we can get a better understanding. And if you have any educators, and two of you might be these people who want to go through the certification route, we now have a process that any educator can become a certified responsive classroom practitioner. The requirement is they use this tool as a reflection tool, and that's part of what they do to document their growth and their ability to reach that level of being certified. All of our consulting teachers that work with us on a part-time per diem basis in the last few years, that's how they became consulting teachers, as they first became certified responsive classroom practitioners. It also allows that coaching on our end for them to support them as well. Just a snapshot of it though, it's meant to be used flexibly. So you could have individual teachers. Sometimes there's that teacher who's gung-ho and says, I want to know more about it. I can't remember, I had that training a few years ago. And sometimes they ask to use the whole Rcat themselves. That's not as likely, to be honest. Sometimes it's a group. Like I said, the first grade team that was having trouble with transitions, they took this and they took the copies and just worked on transitions. You might have a professional learning community in your school where you have one group that maybe is focusing more on routines as part of effective management. Another might be working on a workshop model. So they're working on some of the engaging academic tools. They might use the rubrics for those. And whether you do instructional coaching or peer coaching, this tool really helps open up those conversations as well. So having that tool to look at, to do some reflecting and some goal setting. We do have both an elementary and a middle school model. So they're designed particularly for the level that you're working on. And you might have seen this natural learning cycle when you had your training for what we talk about, how we work with students. But this is the same natural learning cycle that all of us use, including adults. So with adults, they're going to use this tool to help them set goals, generate ideas and goals, use those practices, use the rubric to help them pick those areas that they're going to focus on, put the practices in place, and then afterwards reflect on their practice with the questions that they have. So just the same question, how might this tool be something that's used for you? And it might be right now, especially I feel a lot of empathy for you, Daniela, and the role that you have, and Patty probably in the same boat. It might just be something that you want to get to know this year, want to hold off till next year, which would be fine as well. What are either of you thinking about this tool?
Well, I mean, I know that it seems to be effective when we did use it when it was first rolled out the first year. It was, but then, you know, as teachers leave the school, it's hard to keep, especially when the trainers themselves, the teachers who are trained in, you know, the 4-day program, when they leave, it really kind of goes by the wayside. So it's almost like it has to continue. The training, you know, in that school has to continue. So, but honestly, I guess I could ask the teachers who teach the younger grades if they find it effective. I believe that they have continued to use a lot of the tools.
That's great.
Mhm.
Daniela, do you see a place where this tool might be helpful for you?
Yeah, definitely. I could definitely see this being done in grade level PLCs, like you said, grade levels choosing an area that they want to focus on and doing some of that self-assessment. And I really like the idea of getting certified. I think that's very attractive to some teachers, those kind of early adopters, and then they can kind of be those spreaders of the ideas to their grade levels or, you know, other PLCs. So I think that would be really cool. And I made a note to ask my principal to see if there's any monies, because if people get paid a little extra, they often do it. And that might be a good goal in terms of our PBIS plan, is to have a school of certified RC teachers. And we have the opposite, Patty. Our teachers never leave. So it's good. It's good. And it's also, you know, a challenge to adopt new ideas.
Mhm.
But yeah, those are really great kind of low level self-assessment. I like all that stuff. But again, I don't think it's something that I could add at this point in the year, just given the context and all the other stuff that we do. And I was gonna ask one more other thing, you know, we're a dual immersion school. And if you have any of these materials in Spanish, because our morning meetings are run in Spanish.
We don't right now. We have one of our CTs that has been doing some writing with us is bilingual. And I know we've been asking Patricia if there's possibility that she could help with us. I worked in a total immersion school down in your area a couple of years ago, and they kept saying, we need these in Spanish. I said, create them in Spanish and then work for us so that you can help us, because yeah, they were in the same boat. But it is a challenge, I know.
It's
One of the
because we
things I wanted
create everything in Spanish. So, you know,
Oh.
so the teachers are asked to create almost everything in Spanish, including workshop lessons and all the other stuff. So it would be great, like, if you guys wanted to reach out, if we eventually get a teacher who's certified, then to pay him or her to do that work.
I have your email here, Daniela, and so what I'll try to do is see if I can connect you with that other school that's down in the San Francisco area a little bit more. But I know I was really encouraging one of the participants to become a certified trainer, and she was already starting to put things in Spanish as the advanced workshop. So I know she's got a start of it, and I'll also check with Patricia and see if there's anything. And then you can become a trainer and work with us too and put things in Spanish. One of the things I was going to say, so along that way to become a certified teacher, using this tool is part of that. Also having people, they're required to take the 4-day advanced training. So sometimes schools will bring that 4-day advanced training to your schools, which really we say is an 8-day training, and we would encourage people to do that 4-day training. But sometimes price wise or whatever, they can't do that, but that 4-day training. And then in addition to that, once they become a certified trainer, they have more access to resources through our organization. They're kind of looped in with us as far as some of those resources. That's also the pool. Anyone who's certified is part of the pool where we recruit people to become consulting teachers. And to be honest, your neck of the woods is always an area where we need more consultants. We don't have many down in the California area. Anything else, Ramona or Lindsay, you want to add to the idea of the Rcat?
I was just thinking about how fortunate your schools are, to have you two in there to be that beacon of light and to be that encourager, because as you stated, teachers are navigating new territory. They're, all dedicated teachers worry about their students after the cameras turned off, or, after the computers are gone, they're still not turning off. They're thinking about how to meet needs of students. And there's that tendency to feel helpless. And the fact that you two are a beacon of light to encourage and support. And it sounds like you have a good insight on what would be most helpful for your teachers. And just like you encourage them to have grace, you're having insight of these are some things that are provided for you. The timing of those tools and when you and how you use those tools is what is the value, is thinking about how the readiness of your staff is to make the most impact on that, because they might need something totally different at this time, and then they might need something different in a month or so. So I just wanted to commend both of you on, one, giving up your time to be here, and two, the impact that you're having with your staff.
Well said, Ramona. Thank you. Well, I'm going to wrap up our time together here with just showing you a little bit more that's available for each of you as well. So I kind of set the tone before that we do have educational consulting roles now. Each of our 4 full-time consulting teachers are playing the role of an educational consultant for every school that's under a 4-day contract with us from the summer from last year. So Lindsay, like I said, has the Midwest, and Ramona's over in the Northeast. And then depending upon where your schools fall, you're either with one of those 2 ladies. I think out in California, you're going to have Carrie O'Grady, Daniela, who's going to work with you. And depending upon how the map turns out, you might be with Dina over in DC if you're under a contract. So we'll see how that goes. If it looks like the DC area is with Dina, and Ramona's area is up here in the Northeast. So those would be people that would be your consulting teacher that would work with you. And as consulting teachers, the 4 consulting educational consultants are going to help support you through that role of, after you do your kaleidoscope, if you have any questions along the way, they'll also reach out to your school with an email, and they can be the contact person if you have questions along the way as well. So I know, Daniela, you didn't get a chance to meet Carrie today, but Carrie was on this morning with me when I did this webinar. But she's a great resource who will be there as your support as well. And the same thing, Patty, for Dina. Dina, if she's working with your schools, will have all those resources that you need as well. And you can reach out to any of us. Where you would go from here then is depending upon your resources. If there's additional supports that you need, you might talk about doing a 4-day advanced workshop, either individually or bringing that to your school. We also have 1-day introductory workshops and advanced workshops. All these right now are being done virtually with the goal of, hopefully we'll see what the summer looks like, but doing more in person if everything's safe. But I'm thinking now that we've dipped the toe in the virtual world, there will always be options for some virtual work coming to your school. I'm guessing along the way. And I know we're doing some virtual work this summer as well. The leadership seminar is something that's provided for your school. Danielle, I don't know in your package, because I know for sure you're under a package, and Patty, you weren't sure. 1 free registration for the leadership seminar is provided, where you will get a chance to work with those quick coaching guides and have a little bit more time to do some planning for your school. There are a few more of these being offered this year. The last one takes place in March. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, make sure that someone from your school signs up for that as well. And in addition, we're providing webinars. It's been kind of a new delivery system for us in the pandemic, but it's been really helpful. We have some of them that are online that either are for purchase or free. And when we put them out, we'll send an invite out to everybody. Sometimes, depending upon the content, we're able to offer it for free. If it's a cost, it's really a low cost amount that we ask for that. And we have a lot of resources that can be used too. So I connected you with that as well. So take a moment just to think back to that goal that you wrote down earlier. What's at least one thing that you learned today to help support your work toward that goal? Nick, share with you just an idea of what your next steps would be with this work. You'll get a recording of this webinar. And if you are working with a leadership team, Daniela, it sounds like that's something that you are doing, and Patty, possibly you as well, to share the Kaleidoscope this webinar with your leadership team. So it might be something they will look at their own, or that you go through it together. Then you're going to get that link for the Kaleidoscope tool. Watch those videos first. Again, they're very short, but they will walk you through that process. After you complete that first round of the Kaleidoscope, we're asking you to complete that first cycle by March 1st. If that's at all possible, Daniela, if not, reach out to our school services team. Our school services team, you've probably already worked with. Allison Henry is the director of that team, as well as Christina Jetty and Robin Wells. And they are your resource people. So they're the full-time people that are working in the office. We're the people that are basically on the road or doing presentations virtually. And you will get that packet of 30 quick coaching guides. It does come with a leader guide to help support the professional development options you can do with that quick coaching guide. If there's additional quick coaching guides that might be helpful beyond that year, we sell them individually or in packages of 10 or 30. And with the 10 or 30 come with one of those leader guides to support that professional development. And actually the quick coaching guide alone is a little bit of professional development on its own. The Rcat will be mailed to you, so you'll get this in the mail. And then again, I encourage you also to start thinking, I know it's January and next year seems far away, but knowing that the restrictions you have right now hopefully will be changed for next year, already start thinking about how you can do this in cycles, how you can support teachers in doing this work along the way in cycles. So think for a moment what your next step is going to be. And I'm going to stop share and just ask Patty and Daniela if you want to share your next step, what you're hoping to do after you turn off the computer. Well, not tonight, but what you're hoping to do in the next couple of days with this work. And then any questions that you have for Lindsay or Ramona or for me.
Well, I guess the first thing I need to do is meet with my principal tomorrow. I believe she took the 4-day training in the summer.
Okay.
As part of the Archdiocese of Washington Summer Institute. So I'll meet with her, and I guess I will follow up with her to see if would she have been given the information that we need to set up, or we need to complete Kaleidoscope by March 1st.
After this webinar, it'll be sent to her. So
Okay.
after
Okay.
today, there'll be a
Yeah.
follow-up email.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I know our office will know who participated today. So Patty, we have, if you are attending today, the only people that are attending today receive some type of invitation from us because they're under contract. So maybe, what's your principal's name?
Lisa Kane.
Okay, so Lisa may have that connection. And like I said, Dina Ross will be the gal that'll work probably more closely with you. That sounds perfect. How about you, Daniela?
I'm gonna meet with my principal on Friday and let her know about the tool and try to create a time where she and I can go and use the Kaleidoscope observation before March 1st. And then I'm just wondering, so our whole school does morning meeting that's mandated actually by our district. I'm wondering if that might be like a small chunk to observe, although that would not be advantageous because then I wouldn't be able to get through more than a couple of morning meetings per day. I'm just wondering, like, what's something small we can look at rather than I don't want to look at everything. Do you have any guidance on that?
Sometimes people feel like they need to be observed doing morning meeting because to them, responsive classroom means morning meeting. And the idea is you really should be able to walk into a classroom at any time or join a classroom at any time to see some of the indicators. So I think after you get the training and you see the indicators that you'll be looking at, so after you do that brief video and take a look at the kaleidoscope, you might say, oh yeah, I could really pop on any, like I might want to look at morning meeting, but I might want to just be in any of them. What do you
Okay.
think, Mona or Lindsay? Is that kind of the same thought you're thinking of?
I think once you look at the kaleidoscope tool, when you're using that as an observational tool, one of the strengths of this tool is the hover text. So there's like very explicit descriptions of what we mean by this indicator in this setting and some examples of what it might look like. So Patty and Daniela, as I'm thinking about what I know about this tool and what you're going to see when you use it or look at it yourself, is what I would do is I would be looking at those suggestions and say, okay, so what would that look like in a Zoom room then? Maybe it looks like students' voices being prioritized. Maybe I'm in a Zoom room and I notice that the teacher speaks for maybe 3 of the 17 minutes I'm in there. That would, like kind of looking for, it's not the exact thing, but what would be the translation in this space? It's the end of the long day. Did that make any sense? I feel like I just got a little.
Yeah, that totally did.
Okay.
A lot of sense,
But,
yes,
but yeah, that'll probably be like the big thing that we do is try to get that done this year and then try to do something with it by the end of the year. I'm just being honest.
It's a good goal.
Absolutely. And if this is just me, if you wanted to even just look at one domain, you are going to have to click all the boxes for all the domains. But I think for me, to me, it makes sense to start in with developmentally responsive teaching. In that we can see evidence of positive community. If we're being developmentally responsive, we're going to see kids engaged, we're going to be effective managers. So I don't know, Margie or Ramona, if you have, maybe the suggestion is pick a domain to start with.
I think that's a really good idea. And then it could help you lead to those resources as well. And what Lindsay was meaning, you have to click at everything. There's 18 different things that have to be clicked for each teacher you're observing. So if you're focusing in on a domain, it's either 4 or 5. So 4 or 5 indicators. And then what I would do if I'm not focusing on the other domains, just click not evident, because that would mean I wouldn't even be focusing on those. So I'd only focus on the ones I'm observing.
That's a nice way. And then I can think of it almost think of it as a micro progression, like where am I going to move on that progression of developmentally responsive teaching. That I can do. That sounds doable. Okay.
I'm excited for Carrie O'Grady to work with you too, Daniela, because she's really creative in how she looks at things as well. And we know everybody's going to be doing it a little bit differently. So she'd be a great support. Any one of the educational consultants would be a great support to say, okay, what did you find out and how did it work and how can we support you to do more? And maybe your goal is even for the end of this year is just to know the tool better. So yeah, you might try it out, but you might say, yeah, I'm only going to try out parts of it so that I know. But then next year when I'm ready for it, I'll know what we're looking for. I'll know how to support teachers to be successful in those areas.
Yeah, I like baby steps. That sounds good.
Good. Well, I can't thank all of you enough for staying with us. I know, depending upon what time zone you're in, because you're across the country, both of you are, or all of us are. So thank you for being with us today here and your dedication to your students. I know that there's always hope when we have teachers and educators that are so focused on helping their students be successful that not only are you putting in time to learn for your students, but you're putting in time to support educators to learn as well. So thank you so much.